Good evening. Welcome to tonight's newscast. My name is Elena Nunn, and we will begin with our segment on this decade's presidents. We will start with John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was elected on November 8, 1960 as the nation's 35th president. He was the youngest and the first Catholic president ever elected in U.S. history. Kennedy's policy is known as the New Frontier. Within his policies, he started the Alliance for Progress and the Peace Corps, an organization dedicated to helping struggling third world countries. John F. Kennedy was responsible for the Bay of Pigs invasion. CIA members tried to overthrow Fidel Castro, but ended up failing. The failure led to embarrassment and a downward look on the United States. During Kennedy's terms, the events known as the space race began. It started shortly after the Soviets launched the first man-made satellite into space. Kennedy then declared that we, the United States, by the end of the decade, will put a man on the moon. On Friday, November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. He was killed while riding in his motor car with his wife, Jacqueline. After a 10-month investigation, it was determined that Lee Harvey Oswald was the murderer. On the same day, Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president after John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. Lyndon B. Johnson became our 36th president. He was former vice president to John F. Kennedy. While in office, Johnson worked on domestic policies. He called it the Great Society. The Great Society programs aided education, created Medicare, and the Job Corps. All of the programs were used to help the American people live better lives. LBJ also signed in the Civil Rights Act and lowered taxes. During his term, the space race continued with the Soviets. 3 American astronauts successfully orbited the moon in December 1968. The Vietnam War also progressed as more American troops were sent over. At the end of Johnson's term, he shocked the nation by not rerunning for president. In the same year, Richard Nixon was elected president. Richard Nixon was elected in 1969. He was the nation's 37th president. Richard Nixon ended the war with Vietnam and tried to improve the relationship with the Soviets and Communist China. For the first time in 20 years, Richard was invited to China to meet with the emperor. Nixon also met with the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev. They both discussed plans for limiting nuclear weapons. That is all today for our segment on the presidents, and now we move on to Mark.
Hello fellow classmates. Today is May 20th, 2015. We should definitely be looking to the future, but today we're going to be looking to the past of the 1960 assassination of John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert F. Kennedy. The era of the 1960s will forever be known as deep, mournful for all Americans, as great leaders were never given a chance to change the country. The death of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963 shocked Americans all over the states when the news spread around. Schools across the country dismissed students early, and 54% of all Americans stopped their daily activities to mourn for the death of Kennedy. The world stood still as it watched the leader of the free world gunned down in a horrendous act of violence. The 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. On February 22nd, human rights activist Malcolm X was assassinated by members of the Nation of the Islam in New York City. On April 4th, 1968, the civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee. He championed equality for black people. But sadly, he was killed, and till this day, judgment is still influenced by one ethnicity till this day. The last major assassination of the 1960s was the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. While campaigning for presidential office in March 1968, he was shot by siren at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Siren claimed not to bear any ill will towards Kennedy, but evidence showed that kept a journal to carefully plan the assassination of Kennedy. The era of 1960 will forever be remembered as a tragic period for all Americans, as great prominent leaders were never given a chance to change the lead of the country. Well, that'll be all for today, guys.
1964, two U.S. destroyers stationed on the Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam, radioed that they had been fired upon by North Vietnamese forces. In response to these reports, President Johnson President Johnson requested permission from the U.S. Congress to increase U.S. military presence in Indochina. On August 7, 1964, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, authorizing President Johnson to take any measures he believed necessary to retaliate on the enemies. This resolution became legal basis for the Johnson and Nixon administration of the Vietnam War. The Johnson administration believed escalation of the United States presence in Vietnam was the only solution to winning the war. Operation Rolling Thunder commenced on February 13, 1945 and continued through the spring of 1967. Johnson also authorized the first of many deployments of regular ground combat troops to Vietnam to fight the Viet Cong in the countryside.
Some good news today is that Betty Friedan, a women's rights activist and journalist from Illinois, published the book The Feminine Mystique in 1963. The book explores the idea of women finding fulfillment beyond traditional roles. For some of the goals that women activists strive for were equal work, an end to domestic violence, to end severe limits on women in management jobs, an end to sexual harassment and many other unfair treatment. For women also want to access the same careers and to receive the same compensation as men. And because of women wanting this, in 1966, the National Organization of Women, or NOW, was formed with Betty Friedan being the co-founder of the organization, and she served as its first president.